later too. Yeah, my name is Emma. I'm 25. I'm from Austin, New York. I met Janelle at a summer camp that we were both working at, and
Welcome everybody to the James L. Parr Vintage Halloween Museum, also known as my dining room. I've been collecting for a little over 10 years, and I'm here in Framingham, and it was because of my connection to Framingham that started me on this Halloween collection. I love Halloween anyway, and when I was researching some information about this Halloween haunted trolley tour that I did, I found this unbelievable collection of Halloween decorations and booklets and invitations that the Dennison made about a quarter mile from my house. And I just got really interested in them and started collecting them. And so it's been about 10 years, and I have a pretty good collection. I've since branched out into other things besides Dennison. So I will give you a little tour and a little history at the same time.
everyone watching it later too. Yeah, my name is Emma. I'm 25. I'm from Austin, New York. I met Janelle at a summer camp that we were both working at, and
Welcome everybody to the James L. Parr Vintage Halloween Museum, also known as my dining room. I've been collecting for a little over 10 years, and I'm here in Framingham, and it was because of my connection to Framingham that started me on this Halloween collection. I love Halloween anyway, and when I was researching some information about this Halloween haunted trolley tour that I did, I found this unbelievable collection of Halloween decorations and booklets and invitations that the Dennison made about a quarter mile from my house. And I just got really interested in them and started collecting them. And so it's been about 10 years, and I have a pretty good collection. I've since branched out into other things besides Dennison. So I will give you a little tour and a little history at the same time.
Good evening, afternoon, or morning to you, wherever you are. Each of us is in a different place, and yet here we all are together. Welcome to Utter Hope. I'm Marianne Christie Burnside. Tonight, I get to host 4 wonderful storytellers and all of you. First, a few words about how this show came to be. COVID, a sideways and upside down world. This is not and was not my first pandemic, but 2020 wasn't the first time things went sideways in my life. So I live with 2 aspirations: show up and be helpful. A year or so after my parents died close in time, I got into chaplaincy while volunteering at hospice. In my Master of Divinity studies, I went from hospice to hospital, talking with people about life, suffering, joy, peace, singing, sometimes sitting quietly, accompanying families in the ICU and the emergency department who had experienced sudden traumatic loss of loved ones. Being with people during life's trickiest transitions, offering hope in moments that seemed on the surface to have none. In January 2020, I circled March 11th on my calendar. That was the first day I could order a cap and gown for this very last graduation of mine. Should I rent it? Should I buy it? I thought, who knows, maybe I could be buried in this. So I bought it. The cashier asked me what made me return to school in my 50s to study divinity. I said, life. Life made me do that. That first quarantine night, Friday, March 13, 2020, after my kids went to bed, I wept for them and for me. I was 8 weeks from graduation on this path that had 600 plus clinicals and several thousand educative hours, and it seemed to disintegrate in a day. It took me some weeks to really accept the truth of things as they were, but when I did, I felt hope, an actual lightening of my experience, like an unburdening, and then it was obvious. Things are on hold, they're frozen. I likely won't be a chaplain in the summer or the fall of 2020 as planned, or maybe ever. Aside from that, I may not survive this pandemic. I could be buried in that cap and gown sooner than I thought. But for now, I can still share hope. I didn't know how I would, but I knew that I could. Utter Hope, which was born as an idea soon after that, begins tonight, returns virtually on June 12th, and may even happen live and outdoors over the summer. Stay tuned. Tonight is made possible through a wonderful partnership with Janelle Codiani and her staff at the Amazing Thing Art Center in downtown Framingham, including Dave Hooker, who's working with Janelle behind the scenes tonight. And it's made possible because of you, our listening audience, and the tellers who have joined us. I also want to thank the Metro West Regional Coalition for Suicide Prevention for their support. Hope makes itself visible in unique ways. Tonight, you'll see and hear it in 4 amazing tellers: Deb Jacoby Twig, Nestor the Boss Gomez, Diana Valentine, and Angie Chapman. You'll come to know something about these good people, something about hope through their stories. All the stories are true. Our first teller is Deb Jacoby Twig. Deb is an accomplished, passionate person and advocate for social justice in many ways and forms. She has worked in corporate, public, and nonprofit settings, serving marginalized populations and dismantling the destructive biases that cause human harm. Deb enjoys storytelling and wants to publish some in a book she'd love to write someday. When I asked Deb to name songs that inspire hope in her, she told me her favorites are the Beatles' Blackbird and Alanis Morissette's Ablaze. She also spoke about hope as a particular kind of trust. Tuning in from Lexington, Massachusetts tonight, here she is to say more. Welcome, Deb.
Hi, everybody. Even though we were 44 when we got married, and even though our marriage wasn't legally recognized, Mia and I dreamed a dream of having children. Our plan was that each of us would have a baby using the same sperm donor so that the children would be biological siblings. It wasn't too late. We knew people who had done this in their mid-40s. So we carried forward and started shopping sperm banks online. Shopping for sperm is kind of weird. It's like shopping for cans of fruit on a grocery shelf. Do I want the tall, blonde Russian scientist or the short, dark musician who speaks Spanish? Our doctors were not thrilled with this idea. Our eggs were old. We had medical conditions. It was dangerous in a lot of ways. Plus, we worried, what if our parents unconsciously favor one grandchild over the other? We gave up on sperm. Next, we looked into international adoption. Now, back at that time, it wasn't that great in this country for gay people, but overseas, it was like 100 years behind the US. We would have to do a lot of lying about ourselves. We'd have to totally de-gay the house and create a second adult bedroom that looked super lived in, so that when the surprise home inspectors came, they would be completely convinced that we were 2 single straight women who just happened to own a home together and just happened to want to adopt children together. Well, we had done a lot of work to come out of the closet, and we were kind of done lying about ourselves, so we gave up on international adoption. Next, we looked into the foster path, the fostering to adoption path. We did all the things. We did an introductory seminar, 3 months of night classes, home inspections, lengthy interviews with social workers where we had to answer a lot of deeply personal questions. We got fingerprinted and they ran criminal background checks on us. Even our dog had to pass muster. But we cleared all the hurdles and got approved, and then we sat down and waited for the phone to ring. We waited about a year. Our first foster child came and went in a matter of weeks. There was a psychiatrist that determined that the boy had to be placed in a special therapeutic setting. And that was really painful, but it did give us a chance to pause and assess, now that we'd had a little practice at this parenting business, did we still want to do it? And yes, we did. It made us want children even more. Shortly after that, the foster system sent us a 3-month-old infant named Caleb. Caleb was a failure to thrive baby. He was basically starving to death. And he didn't smile. He didn't even cry. 3 months old. All his close relatives were ruled unfit, and the social services system had to look really hard to find more distant relatives. So while they did that, we went to work and we got Caleb plumped up and smiling and crying and trusting that crying would be rewarded with cuddles and fresh formula and diapers. They were having a really hard time finding relatives, and it was looking more and more like we would get to adopt Caleb. Even the social worker, who isn't supposed to say things like this, said, "I think you guys are going to get this baby." So when she said that, we let our hearts go, and we dreamed dreams of our forever family with Caleb. We looked forward to Thanksgiving when we would introduce him to our families, and after that, baby's first Christmas. But then a few days before Thanksgiving, social services called. They had found a distant relative, and by law, we had to give him up. We packed his things like we were preparing for a funeral. The social worker came. We put him in his car seat and kissed him on the forehead and stood on our porch and waved goodbye. In my mind's eye, I can still see so clearly through the rear window, his little face and head bobbing slightly as the car went around the corner and out of sight. Then we went back in our house, which suddenly felt so empty. We stood in our living room and held each other and just cried and cried and cried. Thanksgiving was hard. Christmas was harder. The winter was long and bleak. Spring came, no relief. We went to Easter services and we left before the egg hunt. The grief clung to us like an unwelcome guest that just wouldn't leave. We decided that foster parenting was something we couldn't do. Our hearts and our hopes just weren't strong enough for that revolving door. Summer came, and somehow we decided somehow we found the strength to try one more thing: domestic adoption. This would be our last shot. We hired an adoption attorney who sent us a very thick stack of papers that felt like Mount Everest, and we stared at that for about a month, and then we finally opened it up. There was this one form that required us to record every single address we ever lived at in our whole lives. For Mia, this was easy, but I had a very long list of addresses, and I had a handful of addresses that were missing from memory and not saved anywhere. Fortunately, my missing addresses were all within driving distance. So one Saturday we got in the car and we drove all over New York and New Jersey just to go to these places that I could find and look at the house numbers and write them down on a pad and then drive on to the next place. It was a hot August day. A couple times we got stuck in traffic jams and had to roll down the window and turn off the air conditioner to save the engine. And then we just sat and sweat in the hot, sticky, still air. What were we doing? Were we two crazy people chasing a crazy dream we could never catch? We were 47 now. By the time the adoption process played out, the domestic adoption process, we could be 48 or 49. Who was going to give a baby to two old lesbians whose marriage wasn't legal? When we got home late that night, exhausted, we had the missing addresses for the form, but in our hearts, we just knew it was over. 2 days later, social services called. Social services. In our grief over Caleb, we had totally forgotten to close our case with the foster system. They had a healthy 3-day-old infant, a male, who was full term, no drugs in his system, Would we take him? Yes. So social services kicked in again, doing their thing, checking their boxes, searching for relatives. This baby, who we named Noah, he seemed to stay. And he grew, and he stayed, and he crawled, and he stayed, and he walked, and he stayed. They couldn't find any relatives. We got a date with family court, and before we knew it, Noah's adoption was final. Our dream had come true. We could finally relax. One day, a short time after Noah's adoption, Mia said to me, I was thinking about that time when Caleb left. What? Why was she bringing this up? She said, I was thinking about the dates on the calendar, the date Caleb left and the date Noah was born. What am I not getting here? Deb, she said, it was 9 months, almost to the day. 9 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb, for that beautiful story. Just tearing up there throughout, and thank you for kicking us off and sharing that moving story of hope. Well done. Another round of applause for Deb. Okay, I want to welcome now our next teller, Nestor the Boss Gomez. Now, Nestor came to the US from Guatemala in the 80s and told his first story at a Moth Story Slam to get over the stuttering that plagued his childhood. Since then, Nestor has won over 60 Moth Slams, published a collection of stories, and curates his own storytelling show and podcast. When I asked Nestor for his song of hope, he named Imagine. And he also said that hope is looking into his kids' eyes. Here's Nestor with a story to share with us now. Welcome, Nestor.
When my kids were babies, my daughter was about 2 years old, my son only 1 year old. We watched a movie together. And it was one of the very first movies that we watched together. And it was a Disney movie. So we fell in love with everything Disney. From that moment on, I started to buy my kids t-shirts with Disney characters on it, toys, Disney toys. I bought them everything Disney, books Disney, toys that were Disney. But at that time, I was broke. So every time that I bought them something, it was a book, a toy, a shirt from the thrift store. It was the only place where I could go and afford to buy something from Disney. A couple of years later, I started to save some money because I wanted to buy them something brand new from Disney. And I actually wanted to take them to the Disney store in Chicago. Have you ever been to a Disney store? They are amazing. I remember taking my kids to the Disney store for the first time. Around this time, my daughter was about 5 years old, my son 4, and I was holding their hands as I walked into the Disney store. I had saved $50 to buy them something brand new from the Disney store. We walked into the Disney store and I was blown away by the toys that were lining up the walls, the stuffed animals, the brand new shirts, the movie collections, and the collectibles. They were so beautiful that I immediately thought, forget the kids, I'm buying me a collectible. After all, when I die, it's gonna be for them. So in a way, I'm buying something for them. So I walked to one of the shows and I grabbed one of the collectibles, thinking, I'm buying this, it's beautiful. And then I look at the price tag. I turn around to see my kids because the price tag was $200. I turned around and I told my kids, don't touch anything. Because if you break anything in this store, I'm gonna get stuck here paying for whatever you break forever. And then I started to put the toy back on the shelf when my daughter started to pull out my pants. And I almost dropped the collectible. I hit my daughter with my hand, but she'll let go of me. And I again tried to put the collectible on the shelf. My daughter pulled out my pants again. I put the collectible on the shelf. I turned around and I asked my daughter, what? What was so urgent that you couldn't wait? And then she didn't say anything. She just pointed. And I realized my mistake because I had taken my eyes away from my son. My son was about to grab one of the collectibles. But my son, being my son, he wasn't trying to grab one of the collectibles from the bottom shelf. No, that would be too easy. He was climbing up the shelves on the Disney store to grab a Little Mermaid collectible that was all the way on the top shelf. I immediately started to run to where he was, but it was too late. As he grabbed for the Little Mermaid, he fell and he broke the shelves, the collectibles, the glasses, the toys. He fell on the floor and all the shells, all the collectibles, all the things fell down with him. I wanted to cry, just thinking about the price of everything that I had to pay now. I ran to where he was. He was starting to cry. So I picked him up and I said, everything's gonna be okay. Everything's gonna be okay. But I'm thinking, I'm screwed. I'm done. The manager came out and I wanted to tell the manager, so how much do I owe you? And the manager looked at me and said, sir, I'm sorry that the shells fell on top of your son. I don't know how that could happen. I'm gonna go look on the video to see what happened. Well, you do that, I told the manager. And you better hope that my son is not hurt. So I'm sorry, she said, and she ran back to the back of the store. I took my daughter and my son and I ran out of the store before she could come and see that it was my son who was climbing on the shelves and broke everything. So as I'm running with my kids, as fast as I can, my kids started to cry because they wanted to stay in the store. And I'm running with them and they're crying and I'm telling them, it's gonna be okay, everything's gonna be okay, everything's gonna be okay, everything's gonna be okay. But not everything was okay. I got married too young. I was only 19 years old when I got married and I had my two kids, one right after the other. I didn't have money to support them. I started to have a lot of problems with the mother. And eventually, a few months later, we got divorced. And I started to see my kids only on the weekends. I became a weekend parent. But I promised myself that I was going to see my kids on the weekends and I was going to try to spend as much time with them as possible. And I was going to watch them as much as possible. So when my kids started to come to my house every weekend, I started to notice things about my son. When he was about 6 years old, his favorite color was pink, and he liked to color everything pink. When he was about 8 years old, he didn't play with trucks and with cars and with soldiers the way that I did. He wanted to play with his sister. He wanted to play with the Barbies. When he was about 10 years old, he was watching cartoons, but he wasn't watching the same kind of cartoons that I used to watch. Thundercats, Transformers. He was watching Sailor Moon. It was his favorite cartoon. I don't know if you've seen Sailor Moon, but it's about this young lady that she finds love by daylight, fights crime by moonlight. My son knew the theme song and he danced to the theme song. So a few years later, when my son turned 15 and he said that he wanted to talk to me, and we sat down and he told me that he was gay, I told my son, boy, I know. I seen you grow. I know you. And I love you just the way you are. And I love the fact that you are so brave, so sure of yourself. But I want you to be careful. That I know. You say, no, son, you don't know. We live in Chicago, which is a very liberal city. But even here, you're going to see people that are going to hate you just because who you are. just because of who you love. Dad, I know, he said. No, son, you don't know. I am a Latino and I speak Spanish donde quiera que yo voy. Anywhere that I go, I speak Spanish. But sometimes there are people that look at me the wrong way. Son, you are Latino and you are gay. I wash my back. You're going to have to wash your back twice as much. Dad, I know, he said. We hugged and everything was okay. My son finished high school. He went to college and then he moved to San Francisco, the capital gay of the world, of course. And everything was okay. But then the 2016 elections came and I started to watch the results of the election. We were about to vote and to bring to the White House the first female president. That was my hope. But now I could see that that was not going to happen. We had just ended 8 years of Obama telling us, yes, we can, yes, we can. We were reaching the mountaintop. And we were about to elect a president that hated immigrants, that hated LGBT community. Everything was falling down. Everything was breaking down. We cannot. And I was freaking out about my son because he was all the way in San Francisco. Things were going to happen to him. He was going to get hurt. So I called my son to see how he was doing. And it was a miracle. He answered the phone. And as soon as he answered the phone, I say, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you watching the elections? Are you watching the results? Dad, I heard his voice on the other end of the line. Dad, this is not time to freak out. This is time to organize. Me and my friends, we are getting together. We are organizing. We are organizing. This is the time to get together. And all of a sudden, I realized the little boy that fell down from the shelves and broke so many things and I carried in my arms was now telling me that everything was going to be okay. Now he was carrying me and making me feel so proud and making me feel that as long as we organize, as long as we fight together, everything is going to be okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Nestor, for that wonderful story. I really appreciated hearing the arc of your son's journey and your journey. And I do know what the Disney store is, and I only once was enough for me.
They are so beautiful.
Okay, so we are rolling right along here, and it's my pleasure. We're going to give another round for Deb and Nestor, okay, right now. And it is my pleasure to move us forward by introducing Diana Valentine. Diana is tuning in tonight from Rhode Island. Diana specializes in comedic stories of lived experience and has been telling stories in the Boston area for over a decade. When I asked Diana to name songs that inspire hope in her, she named the theme song to the Mr. Rogers Show, Won't You Be My Neighbor? And Diana also said, hope is planting a garden. So let's welcome Diana and her story.
Thank you so much. I'm still coming on down from the last two stories, and it's my pleasure to be the next teller. Thank you so much for having me. Let me get started. So we bought our house in 2018, and it was shrouded in half dead, really tall, like 60-foot pine trees. And so by early 2019, my husband and I were able to take down all 36 of the trees, which left our yard looking very bare and our house very naked. And so Ian and I kind of looked at each other and we're like, well, we don't really like mowing a lawn. And I said, how about a garden? I'm sure I could make one. I don't know how to garden, but I had plenty of friends and family who did. And I watched a lot of YouTube and a lot of garden, like British garden shows. Shout out to Monty Dunn. And I decided to just garden our entire front yard, which is the length of our house. So I did that. Let me just give you a little description of how long and wide this thing is. So it's 150 feet long, 14 feet at its widest, 3 feet at its most narrow. And I learned from watching all the garden shows and listening to advice from all of my family and friends that when you have a garden like this, you create garden rooms or sections. And so just as a reminder, I'm creating this garden so I don't have to mow, because my husband and I don't like mowing. And also it's a great excuse to meet neighbors in our neighborhood, because Ian and I are both new to the Providence area. And I thought, this is how I'm going to do it. So let me tell you about my top 2 favorite rooms, and also coincidentally, the only ones I've really finished at this time. The first one is a rock garden. It's near our driveway, full of rocks, as you would imagine. Ground covers, lots of cool textures. But my favorite thing that I put in there last year was a weeping redbud with beautiful burgundy heart-shaped leaves. And the second room that I created is called a stumpery. And if you don't know what a stumpery is, totally fine. I'm pretty sure they really didn't know what to make of it when it was its most popular in the Victorian age. But basically, I gathered up all of the dead trunks and stumps of our pine trees and dumped them in the middle of our yard. And then you're supposed to plant in the nooks and crannies, kind of create like a living sculpture. But until the plants would take, I had a lot of neighbors stop by and be like, firewood? And I'd be like, no, I'm doing this on purpose, like intentionally, just give it a second. And now it's like totally full and bursting with all these flowers and woodland looking things. So 2019, I spent the whole time just kind of planting as much as I could and turning this like half dead grass yard into a full garden. It was a lot of work and I didn't get super far. So in 2020 in March, when the pandemic started, I thought this will be my chance. This will be a way to brighten my neighbors' days, make them smile. I'll get to talk to them. I'm obviously going to spend a lot of time at home. So I will create this garden and make it as awesome as possible. Now I should note that at the end of our road is a middle school. And so we often got a lot of foot traffic, a lot of kids going by walking to school. And when the pandemic started, it quadrupled. We had people going past our yard like every single day. And so I dug right in. I decided I'm going to make it as awesome as possible. So around May, I started seeing art rocks infiltrate the garden, but like a good infiltration, just like little painted rocks with like hearts and rainbows and peace signs and the word love on it and like little sayings. They got more and more complex. And throughout the entire summer, art rocks would just show up in the garden in obvious places and not so obvious places, and they would rotate, they would move on their own. I assume it was parents and kids, but I never ever saw them. And in June and July, plants started to arrive in the garden. Unbidden, unasked for, but totally welcome, wonderful perennials. And they would end up on my doorstep in bags and like pots in the garden. And so I assumed the neighbors just wanted me to integrate them. And so I did that. And then around, so I was working really hard the whole time. I'm talking to tons of neighbors. I'm meeting all the goals I wanted to make friends. And I just want you to know, I made friends covered. I didn't look like this. I was mostly covered in dirt. My husband calls it gardening, Diana. I have leaves stuck out of my hair. I have tons of smudges all over my face, but yet I still made friends. It's wonderful. At one point I was weeding I was grumpy about it. I was hot, sweaty, weeding. And a neighbor came up to me that I never thought would ever come up to me in a million years. Usually wears like a ripped up trucker hat and a NASCAR shirt. Not the typical neighbor that would stop and talk to me about plants. And he was carrying a little potted prickly pear cactus. And I guess I was probably a little bit more grumpy than I wanted to be. And I was a little bit more sarcastic. And he said, I said, oh, are you taking your plant on a walk? And he said, no, this plant's for you. I see you out here every single day. And I've grown this plant in my garden for years. And I just thought you would want it. I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh, of course, thank you so much, and I'll treasure it. And I immediately planted it, and every time he walks by now, we wave. But I did not think, a neighbor that seemed to like work more on his car would ever want to stop by and talk to me about plants, but he does, like, all the time. Gives me great advice about roses. I had no idea. Towards the end of the summer, someone left me a lavender plant with a card, not signed, just saying that every time they passed by the house, it made them smile, and the garden was different every single day, and they loved it, and they wanted me to have a plant to add to the garden. And then this last person stopped by in September and took my breath away with what they said. They said, sorry. They said every time they walk by this garden, it makes them feel safe and loved. Sorry. And loved. And I was like, I had never thought for a moment how a garden would make a neighbor feel. I thought it would make them smile. I thought, cool plants, no mowing, I would meet neighbors. I had no idea a garden would become a collaborative art project between me and the neighbors. Blew me away. So this year I've already started gardening, and neighbors are already stopping by asking if I want plants. I have friends and family that are dropping plants off. And this garden has become its own character in the neighborhood, an interactive community art project between me and the neighbors. And it's something they work on themselves, and I just am kind of like the custodian of it. And it's a garden that people bring art into, and it makes them feel loved and safe. And it connects neighbors to each other. I mean, what more would you ask for from a garden? Thank you.
Wow. Diana, thank you for that story. I was picturing it as you told, and I have such a lovely image in my head. I bet others do too. And your story reminds me that transformation happens in community. That's the only place it happens. And you just gave us a wonderful illustration of that. I want to come see your garden in person.
Come on down.
I may get there yet. Rhode Island's on my list. Definitely on my list. Thank you. So I we'll give another round of applause. I think everyone gets 2 rounds at least, and we'll get another one at the end. Thank you. So it's time to introduce our 4th and final teller of the evening, Angie Chapman. Angie is with us tonight from Dorchester, Massachusetts. Now I pronounce it that way because I'm from New York. If I grew up here, I'd say Dorchester, and I know that's a terrible Boston accent. I'm sorry. I love Boston. I've been here a long time. Angie is a writer, an editor, and a storyteller. Her essays and short stories have appeared in Pangyrics, The Rumpus, and more. Angie has told at The Moth, Story Collider, and WGBH's Stories from the Stage. When I asked Angie about A Song of Hope, she immediately said, Roberta Flack's rendition of the Beatles classic, We Can Work It Out. Here's Angie to tell more. Welcome, Angie.
I'm seated across the table from my parents, who have just returned from my school and the meetings with all of my teachers. And I'm confused because I am a straight A student. The nuns love me, and yet my parents seem disturbed. It turns out that the nuns do love me, and I'm so good at school, they want me to change schools. And of course, I'm 12, so if my parents say you are changing schools, I am changing schools. When I go to the old school, I have to get up at 7 o'clock, have breakfast, make my bed, get dressed, and walk 8 blocks. My new school, I have to get up at 6 a.m. and get dressed, make my bed, have breakfast, and take a bus an hour and a half to the other side of the city. The other thing about my new school is that it has a lot of white kids and very, very few Black kids. In fact, in most of my classes, I'm the only Black kid. And so my mother has warned me that I might be teased a little bit for being Black, but I should ignore it. Lo and behold, one day in biology class, we're going over the anthropology and the human tree. And John Westford Hamilton III reaches over and tells me that I'm descended from monkeys because my skin is brown. And since my mother had warned me, I don't cry. I just sit still. And all of John's friends laugh at the joke. My teacher, Mrs. Lambrakis, must have heard the laughter, and she turned around and told the boys and pinched John hard, because teachers could do that back then. And she said, "That is not nice. Skin is skin, whether it's brown or white." And she sent John and his crew down to the headmaster for additional punishment. Later, after spring break, my father takes us all skiing, and my skin gets tanned and burns. And another girl at my locker looked at me next door to me and said, "What's happened to your face?" And fortunately, one of my new friends, Marcy, a Jewish girl, said, "Oh, you're being so silly. She's tanned and burned, and so her skin is peeling," because skin is skin. I have to tell you that at this school, it was really nice in some ways. There was a pool in the basement. And when the stadium was closed because the Blackhawks had a game, the Chicago Bulls came and practiced in our gym. This was before Michael Jordan. And 2 blocks away was this theater company called Second City. And we got free tickets because our teacher was one of the theater company who worked there part-time. So there were very good things about my education that I recognized. One of the other ones was that Sir George Schulte, the orchestra conductor of the Chicago Symphony, came to our school to explain what we would hear the next day. So there were lots of benefits, and yet I was still very aware of being an African American. But I got over it. In fact, I have to tell you that I really didn't remember any of these incidences until one of my classmates contacted me on Facebook and apologized. He was not John Winter Hamilton III, but he was one of the crew, and he remembered saying those mean things to me. It turns out he was an alcoholic, and he was working on his step to make amends. And so after he did that, I remembered, and I thought that perhaps there was hope, that even though because of my skin color or my gender or both, I get harassed in some way 24/7, 365. But maybe, just maybe, things are changing and everybody will know that skin is skin. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. I love the details and how you shared with us a story that spans from the time of your childhood until now. And you named so many things that are important for us to hear. I thank you for sharing that story with us. I think that all of the tellers have been fantastic tonight, and I want to give another round of applause. It's all about the hands tonight. The hands and the voices. I also want to thank, I'm going to thank everybody by name too, so you remember their names. Deb Jacoby Twig, Nestor Gomez, Diana Valentine, and Angie Chapman. Thank you all for your stories. Thank you all for being part of opening night. I want to thank again Janelle Codiani and ātac, the Downtown Arts and Music, also known as the Amazing Thing Arts Center in downtown Framingham. I hope that you enjoyed opening night of the show and that your experience was a good one. I would love to hear from you. I set up an email address just for this reason, so that you could write me and tell me about your experience of the show tonight. Include any suggestions that you have for us going forward, because this is the beginning. You're all here for the first night. We're going to do this again on June 12th in this format virtually. And we are hoping that we can do a live in-person outdoor show by the end of the summer. We'll see. But we do hope to do the 3 shows and then we'll see, perhaps more. So I do want to hear from you, whatever you would like me to know. The email is utterhope@gmail.com, because I haven't paid for the website yet. So I set up a free Gmail account. I'm going to put that in the chat just so that y'all have it. Oh, thanks. Diana did that. Well, now it's in there twice. That's cool. Thank you. On Saturday, June 12th, we're going to, as I said, do this again from 8 to 9 Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to welcome 4 tellers and their stories. And some of the tellers here may know the tellers who are coming in June. And some of you in the audience may have heard these tellers tell before. Allison Muzila, Brendan Schneider, Teresa Okokon, and Anna Willis Collier. I hope I pronounced everybody's name correctly. I'm sorry if I messed it up. You can also find Utter Hope on Facebook. And of course, you can find ātac on Facebook, and you probably have seen a few posts about this show. Thank you, everybody, for spreading the word. And I am working on, setting up the other accounts, but we wanted to get rolling as soon as we could. So I'm going to give a round of applause for everyone, Janelle, Dave, everyone at ātac, Deb, Nestor, Angie, Diana, and all of you, the audience. So thank you, everybody. We do have a few more minutes, so if it's okay, I'd like to just read a few things from the chat that you all have been sharing throughout the show. How would that be? So beautiful, beautiful story. Scrolling, scrolling. Great story, amazing story, moving story. These are about all different stories, of course, but they're true for all of us. We learn from our kids. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Getting free stuff from neighbors. Yes. Beautiful story. Gardening is so healing. Fantastic. Beautiful. Bravo. Lots of clapping. And again, beautiful stories. That word's coming up a lot. Wonderful. Gives me hope. Such wonderful stories. Thank you for sharing. Wonderful. Thanks. Love the stories. Thanks. So you get the idea. I hope the tellers can feel the love. And I look forward to the day that we can all be in the same place and do this again. But meanwhile, this is pretty good to be able to do this at all on Zoom and to welcome people from all over. So thank you everyone for coming and spending the evening with us. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.